Hi, Kevin Coupe here, and this is FaceTime with the Content Guy, coming to you this week from Portland, Oregon, where I've been spending most of the month of July. A little bit of a vacation. I'll share some of those details with you tomorrow on Offbeat. But I've also had the privilege of team teaching a class at Portland State University this month on CPG and retail marketing. I was lucky enough that Dr. Tom Kilpatrick called me up, offered me this opportunity. I grabbed it, not just because I love the Pacific Northwest, but I also love the notion of being in a classroom. I'd like to share some lessons with you that I've learned so far. First one, by the way, is if you have any time to spend in a classroom, you ever get that opportunity, grab it. The thing about these college students is, I know I walk in that room, I'm not the smartest one there. I'm far from it. They're all smarter than I am. They're all really savvy. And they're interested and they're interesting, and if you get a chance to spend time in a college classroom, it's really worth your while. I've done it for years as one-shots, and that's great. This is like a one-shot on steroids, and it is such a great opportunity. I can't even tell you how excited I've been by it, and I get more excited with every passing day. Some lessons from the classroom, and I'll be honest here. I've promised everybody that when I'm in that classroom, I have my teacher's hat on, not my writer's hat on. So everything that goes on in the classroom is pretty much confidential. But I think there are some things I can tell you without speaking at a school. One thing, these kids are great writers, and that has really surprised me. I never would have thought that. You read about these kids not being facile with language because of the way they use computers and texting and stuff like that. These kids are great writers. I gave them this assignment. I wanted them to give me a short essay on their most memorable meal. And that's because I think food marketers very often are not in touch with the notion of food, how it tastes, why it's important to people. And so I thought this would be a good way to do it. Well, the essays I got back were great. They were well written. They were evocative. You could practically smell the food. It was really, really good and such a wonderful surprise. Another lesson. Last week we had a guy come into the class, a guy I know, an old friend, who spent some time at the classroom. He's a senior retail executive. That's all I'm going to tell you. But he was great, blew their socks off. I think they blew his socks off. And that was really wonderful. At the end of class, one of the kids came up to him and asked him, was he going to be doing store visits the next day? And he said, yeah. He says, the kid says, can I go with you? Oh, I was a little taken aback. This took real cojones for this kid. Retail executive didn't miss a beat. He said, absolutely. They set up a time. They went out together. They both had a great time. I think they both learned from each other. And who knows, this kid could get a job someday because of what he did. And if nothing else, he learned from it. And I think that's really valuable. That's a great business lesson. It's a great life lesson. You've got to be willing to ask the question that nobody else is willing to ask. You've got to be willing to take a chance that maybe other people are not willing to take. If you do that, you're always or almost always going to get something out of it. You're going to advance. If you're not going to advance in terms of your career, you're going to advance in terms of your knowledge, and that's usually important. It kind of reminded me of back in the old days when I went to college. I went to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and I was taking a class called The Philosophy of Death. Yeah, I know, it sounds a little weird. It was the 70s, but it was a really interesting class that focused on how different cultures and different societies and different religions, what are their different perspectives on death. And one night, the professor in the class decided, the class needed a real interesting learning experience, so he took us all to the LA City Morgue. Because where else are you going to encounter death like that? And it was an extraordinary experience. People and bodies are being wheeled in and out. There's autopsies going on. Well, there's like 25, 30 students there. People are dropping like flies because it's pretty intense. Well, what happens is I kind of soldier on. I find this all fascinating. And at one point, they took us into the cooler, and there are only a few of us left. I'll never forget this. There was on a gurney, there was the body of this young black guy. Couldn't have been more than a couple of years older than me, and he was very dead. He was in rigor mortis, and I'll never forget, his eyes were open. He was like this, and there's a bullet hole in his throat. And it was really an extraordinary thing to see. So I turned to the professor and I said, can I touch him? Well, he was taken a little bit aback because in years of teaching this class, nobody had ever asked that before. Why? I said, I've never felt death before. So go ahead. I reached out and I touched his arm, and I'll never forget the feel. It was cold and it was waxy and it felt like death, and it was unbelievable. And I really learned something that night by being able to ask something or being willing to ask something that nobody else was willing to ask. Among other things, I got an A. I didn't have to take the final because the professor was just, I knocked his socks off. But more importantly, I learned something, not just about death, but about the importance of being willing to go one step further than other people are willing to go. It meant a lot, and I've tried to take that lesson with me, and I'm actually trying to impart that to my class, the ability to ask the question that nobody else is willing to ask. I'm proud of them because they seem to be doing it, and I'm really enjoying it because guess what? I'm in the classroom, and I'm having yet another learning experience, and that's hugely important. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this Thursday morning, and as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.